If you're a mid-level to C-suite leader who wants to own your growth and figure out your next small, brave move to achieve your leadership goals, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Small Brave Moves podcast, a weekly deep dive on how to be braver in leadership and in life for exceptional results. I'm your host, Nicole Bianchi, best-selling author, certified master executive coach, NSA certified speaking professional, chief bravery officer, and tough talk expert. If you're ready to become a better, braver, and more authentic leader, let's dive in. Welcome back to the Small Brave Moves podcast, where we explore the everyday acts of courage that shape how we lead. Today's episode is all about what it looks like to show up bravely in the moments that matter most, especially when you're in rooms where you might not feel like you belong yet. I'm excited to welcome Olivia Lynch, Director of Sales Programs at Salesforce and the Global President of the Salesforce Women's Network. Olivia sits at the intersection of sales, marketing, and community, building programs that drive real pipeline while also creating spaces that elevate people and perspectives around the world. In this conversation, Olivia shares a powerful moment of raising her hand in a room full of senior executives and what it taught her about courage, credibility, and using her voice. We talk about how bravery often looks like asking one thoughtful question, trusting the people who see more inside of you than you see in yourself, and choosing to show up even when your heart is pounding. This episode is a reminder that you don't need the title, the certainty, or the perfect words. You just need the willingness to take one small, brave step. Here's my brave conversation with Olivia Lynch. Olivia, I am so excited to have you here today and to go deep on some inner leadership work, some conquer yourself, small, brave moves that you've made. And I'm just excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here as well.
Well, Olivia, let's get into it. So I want to go straight to a moment that you referenced, actually in a very vulnerable LinkedIn post, which connected me with you about you being in a room full of executives and making the choice to raise your hand. So take us into that moment. Where were you? What was happening, especially internally before you spoke up?
Yeah, so each year, the organization that I work for, Salesforce, brings our senior most executives together in a room to really reevaluate how are we tracking on the year? Are we progressing as a company in the way that we want to? And I had the opportunity to attend as a part of my leadership of this group, Salesforce Women's Network, which is our gender equity group at Salesforce. And we were having a lot of discussion in the room. And if you can picture this, it's probably the top 400 executives at this organization. And I'm there for the first time, and I'm director level in my role. And generally speaking, pretty confident. But when you're surrounded by senior vice presidents, your CEO is in the room. It really was a moment of, if what I'm going to say is going to make the conversation better or help clarify for someone, then I feel like I can be brave in this moment and raise my hand to share my thoughts.
Let's talk about the moments leading up to it. So talk to us about how you were feeling before you raised your hand, because I know you're not alone in those moments, right? So I'm curious the narrative that was going through your head in that moment too.
Yeah, I mean, it was, my heart is pounding and my voice is shaking. And you're kind of like, if I misspeak or maybe don't articulate this the way that I want, my mind kind of goes to what's the worst that could happen. And in that moment, it was like, the worst that could happen is you embarrass yourself in front of essentially your entire company, because these conversations are being recorded as well. So there's a lot at stake, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to us after the moments, the hours post, whether it's the conversations during breaks or that evening. Talk to us what came up for the people that were closest to you.
Well, I think first, like, it gave me a bit of credibility, but it did definitely change the perspective of others that were a part of the conversation. And I think as a group, we were all still ruminating on, okay, what comes next? How do we want to think about this differently? What do we do now that we sort of have some recognition around this topic? So it shifted from, okay, we're in alignment to how do we operationalize some of what has been discussed. And I love that personally. Like I learn by doing, I work best when I can get hands on. So it is really easy for me to shift from sort of articulating a concept to, okay, now let's go do something about it. So I loved that. And that is a part of the conversation that I'm more comfortable in. So then what transpired next was just more comfort on, okay, what do we do about this?
So talk us through the question raised. What was your goal, your intent that you were looking for by challenging with this question?
It can be tough to demonstrate what employees at various levels and in other parts of the business may be feeling in a room full of executives. And sometimes it's like those like uncomfortable truths, honestly, to say, I see what your experience is, but here's what another part of our employee base may be experiencing. And it's not all negative necessarily. It's just a difference of things change and we are a global organization as well. So when you're thinking about the wide array of perspectives, cultures, there's just a lot to consider. So I felt like I had a little bit of responsibility to give a voice to some of that based on my experience. And I think it was a moment of learning for some of the other folks in the room, or it called them back to some of the experiences maybe they've had with their teams more recently and gave a little bit of context, honestly.
Well, it does. And as leaders in an organization, it's impossible to see or hear or pick up on everything. So, having trusted leaders like yourself being able to raise their hand and say, I want to share a different perspective or help you see something you may not be seeing helps them, right, operate at a much stronger level. Without that, I mean, it's difficult to be successful, right?
Absolutely.
So you said leadership is the choice to show up. When has it been hardest for you to show up, even at your level?
You know, I would say right now, like in 2026, I mean, there's so much information, there's misinformation, there's a lot happening outside of anyone's four walls. And I feel a lot of empathy and feel what's happening in the world really deeply. I think it is really the conscious choice to try to acknowledge what's happening, especially for your teams, but then also be present and try to reconnect to some sense of purpose, not get too bogged down in the negativity, sit with those emotions, but also make space for actually getting the work done and reconnecting everyone to that shared purpose.
I'm an empath as well. So I have to be really careful that I don't carry it with me on and then I find a way to release it. And so, and when I don't release it, my body definitely feels it. So talk to me about how do you manage internally inside of Olivia in those moments or those moments following?
I think that the team around me helps me have a lot of perspective, and I always try to come back to perspective, breaking things down into sort of what is demanding my most immediate attention or what person on my team really needs support most urgently. Because if you try to look at every piece of the puzzle all at once, no human can handle all of that. So I try to simplify and prioritize as best I can. And then I'm someone too who really values health and wellness. So it's like, do I need to take a step back? Do I need to go take a walk outside and then and come back to this moment so that I can be present? I think I feel a lot of emotion in my body often. So that sort of helps me recenter.
It's such a good reminder to do that. So many people don't, right? So I love that. So you operate in environments, I've operated in environments like this often where there's hierarchy, there can be scrutiny, high stakes. This is very common, right? Especially in Fortune 500 companies and the public sector. What does bravery actually look like in that context for you?
I was thinking about this a lot, and I realized that even though it's a high stakes environment, I don't feel like the bravery is rarely like a big moment. A lot of times, I think it is something like a question that
Mm,
really opens up the perspective of a conversation. I'll give you an example because there's a leader that I really admire, Amy Weaver. She's the former CFO at Salesforce. She had this way of asking questions that I've never forgotten. She could walk into any room, like, at any level, and she'd say something like, "Can you help me understand?" And what
mm,
followed would just reframe the entire conversation because it was curious, it was brave, and when she asked the question, it means that she's willing to sit with whatever the answer is, even if it's uncomfortable. So, for me, I feel like in those environments, I've tried to make that strategy my own and choose courage over comfort every day. Um, I start by trying to lead with a question so that instead of telling the room, "Hey, I think you're missing this," or "Here's a piece of constructive feedback," I try
mhm.
to present it as a question so that it invites people to see it for themselves. I think that's where the real shift happens, like that genuine curiosity, because I think it lowers people's defenses, like creates space for them. And I feel like that's one of the bravest things you can do in a high stakes room.
For those that aren't masterful yet at asking the questions, you see them jump in and want to reposition their thought or give advice. And it's interesting. Just a few weeks ago, I was working with a group of leaders who had become leaders in the last year or two. And it took me back to the moments of early on in my career where I was like, oh, that's right. They still are trying to be the expert, right? Moving from individual contributor to now leader. And they're still trying to project or direct their expertise and demonstrate and show versus pausing and asking questions. And it was fascinating. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot about those moments. I'm working with them on the skill of coaching, moving from being directive to being stronger in their coaching skills. And I was like, pause and just ask one question. If you can do that, that will shift everything for you. And so I just love that you said that. It just takes me back to that moment because I think we do become more masterful as we experience more leadership experiences and gain more expertise, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exactly as you said, you want to show that you know what you're talking about, but this honestly requires a little bit more humility. And let me take a step back. And I found that people are way more receptive than when you come in as the expert, honestly.
Yeah. So let's move into some small brave moves. What's a small brave move that seemed minor at the time but really changed your trajectory?
I wanna give the most honest answer because I would love to say that I was constantly raising my hand to take on new challenges and things, but I will say that initially, and even more recently in my career, if I'm being honest, there's a lot of times where you're presented with opportunities, and it's kind of instinctual to go, I'm not the most qualified for this role, or someone else is better suited. And it's really taken other people saying, "No, you would actually be the best fit for that opportunity," or "You belong in this room." And so I would say the brave move is trusting the people that I admire to then
Mm.
raise my hand and do the thing. Like, I would love to say that I trust myself most, but I think I trust my network most, and they've helped guide me to where I've gotten today, to be honest.
So they saw in that moment more in you than you even saw in yourself, right?
Yep, absolutely.
I love that. I love that. Take me back to how this felt because we often skip this part of when they saw more inside of you than you even saw in yourself. And you were like, okay, well, I'm going to trust you. Talk to me about what was going on inside of you at that moment.
It's really uncomfortable because on the one hand, you're like, "Oh, I feel really honored," but then on the other hand, you're going, "Now not only do I have the stakes of this potential role or project or whatever it is, but I also don't wanna let them personally down." So it's sort of that, like,
Yeah.
double whammy, like, you have even more pressure. I think for me, though, I really pride myself on being there for the people in my life, so I'm gonna do whatever it takes to not let them down, so I think that ultimately helped drive the success too.
Yes, it's very much a conquer yourself moment. So we're going to lean into some brave conversations. Is there a conversation you wish you would have had earlier on in your career?
There are a few I can think of, but I think the commonality is sort of between them goes back to our last bit of conversation really around not having that confidence in myself and not having the credibility. So it was always just, okay, well, if I have more information or if I feel more comfortable or if there's data, like then I'll be ready and prepared to have this conversation. And really, that's not worth waiting for. I think when you have a certain understanding and conviction that this conversation needs to happen. It's uncomfortable, but what's more uncomfortable is waiting. That's when you just have to go for it. I think there is not going to be the perfect amount of data and credibility and all of those things. And you owe it to that person to proceed with the uncomfortable conversations. And even if it doesn't go perfect, the value of not having waited until so much has changed or you've kind of lost them is really worth it, I would say. So, like, if I could go back in time, I feel like I would have the conversation when the thought first comes to me, not when it's perfectly packaged.
Yeah.
Brave doesn't necessarily mean polished. I think it is about the timing and that conviction.
I think you're exactly right. And it's interesting when I listen, I coach a lot of executives, and when I hear them talking through the conversation and their need for it has to be perfect. They're trying to find the exact words and I'm always like, time out. If you are in the moment and you say something that didn't come out the way you intended, it's okay to say, let me rephrase that because you're not perfect either. And they're going to look at you and be grateful that you're at least willing to have the conversation versus it being perfect or like you've waited too long. You're giving them some information in a timely manner that can give them the opportunity to make a shift. And then it's their choice. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but I can see the need to get it right.
Oh, yeah. My boss and I actually always say we're in the recovering perfectionists club. So shout out to everyone else who feels like you are a perfectionist. So that resonates with me a lot, honestly.
I love that. I love that. So that was back then. How do you handle brave conversations today? What's your philosophy, your approach in brave
You know,
conversations?
I will say I have not fully given up this idea of preparing for the conversation, right? Especially in those high stakes environments. You can't go in without having any thought being put to them by any means. And so I'm not saying that, but what I have realized, and kind of going back to this idea of having the people in your network that are supportive to you, it's really that like intentional relationship building before the conversation happens. So either is there someone that is helping you prepare and giving feedback that you trust, or are there people in the room that know you and can understand your values and the perspective that you're coming from? It's kind of that board of directors where when you're having these conversations, there are people that you can turn to. So I think I've been lucky enough having those people around you that you know that you can count on. And even when things don't go right, that can help coach you to here's what we can do next, or here's how you can do things differently in the future. So for me, it's really like the community is everything.
What you're articulating is a lot about the how we work conversation, which is the first of the 5 tough talks that I wrote about. And then how we work conversation, it is about that relationship building, but it's also asking questions like, I'm going to have to give you feedback from time to time. What's the best way to do it? Or, hey, if I work for you, Olivia, and I want to challenge you, what's the best way to do that? If I want to challenge your thinking on something. And it gets that messiness out early so that when it does come time to have some of those, it doesn't feel so awkward, so defensive, so almost disruptive, you know?
For sure, and I feel like there's so much to be said with conversations happening virtually as well. That is a whole different we could probably have an entire separate conversation on just what some of the body language that you see online or don't see online that maybe if the conversation would have been had in person. That's really challenging. Like, I will always prefer to have a difficult conversation in person if
Yes.
possible.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, as your leadership has grown, what's an internal narrative that you've had to rewrite for yourself?
I think for me, it's more about not rewriting the story. I just think this concept of imposter syndrome is sort of a systemic myth where it's, oh, you have to fix something about yourself in order to like fit in at this organization. And I think a lot of times it's the systems, it's the rooms, it's the structures that weren't built for every leader in mind. And when we say to underrepresented leaders, like, you just need to rewrite your story, we're kind of letting the system off of the hook. That's my thoughts. I'm curious to hear what you
Yeah.
would say.
So I'm coming at it from a little different standpoint. The data shows that if there is imposter syndrome happening, it actually impacts men and women equally, which so many people will throw it towards the it's a women issue, right? And it's no, no, no. And then actually the data goes deeper and it shows that disproportionately it impacts high performers. So if you're a high performer because you're so much more aggressively going after your goals, right? That it's going to pop up more often where you're going to pause and go, oh, wait a minute. Oops. And you're right. Environment can very much play a role in it. Part of it can be our own narrative in that moment too, but environment can absolutely impact how strong this imposter syndrome can be.
I totally agree with you. And I think it goes back to that idea of when the stakes are higher, when you're climbing the ladder, there's more visibility, it's riskier. So that fear, I think, naturally just comes up for
Right.
leaders and high achievers. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And even go back to the moment where your leaders believed in you more than you believed in yourself at
yeah.
that moment. Imposter syndrome can pop in and it's just really self-doubt, right? A little self-doubt. But knowing that like you're given the space to figure it out is what probably lessens it in that moment. So
Yeah.
final question for you is for someone listening who feels hesitant to raise their hand in a room where they don't yet feel they might have the credibility, the expertise, the title, what's one small brave move they can make this week?
Yeah, not that I wanna be a broken record, but I think that idea of asking one thoughtful question in a meeting that will not necessarily prove that you've done your homework or you have all the answers, but something that you can show up and genuinely be curious about that will help you have a better understanding or the room have a better understanding of whatever the challenge is. I really think that shift from I have to know everything to how can we as a group kind of discuss some different perspectives and look at things in a new way is really valuable. I think when I was able to make that shift in my leadership journey, it changed how a lot of those brave conversations were happening for me.
It reminds me of a statement I shared not long ago around brave leaders rehearse for the tough moments, right? We rehearse for the brave conversations, those moments where we might be in the large rooms and questions we might want to ask. So I love that. Brave leaders rehearse for those moments. Olivia, thank you, thank you, thank you for
Oh,
joining me
this was
today and
great.
bringing up
I feel
serious.
like I could keep talking to you
I
for
know.
hours. I
We
love
could, we
it.
could. I just appreciate the leadership wisdom and experience that you threw down for us. And I know it'll be helpful for everyone that's listening. Thank you so much for joining Small Brave Moves today. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Small Brave Moves podcast. If you're wanting to take this work even deeper, I'm here to help. From engaging in inspirational keynote speeches to transformational coaching and workshops for leaders and teams. page-turning books, online courses, and enlightening leadership development retreats. There are so many ways that we can work together to take your leadership to the next level. For more information, check out the show notes, and let's do this together, one small brave move at a time. See you next week.